For many of us, summer represents an escape from our fast-paced, hectic lives. It's the season of no school, much-needed vacations, and longer days to do many of the things we really love, like gardening. We'll visit some interesting places, and I want to show you some simple ideas to enjoy during those long, hot days. We'll look at ways to get weeds out of your life, but make roses last for years. Have a sweet treat from a summer favorite, and create a knockout summer container. We'll also visit a place where many of our favorite blooms get their start, and discover some simple ways to give your garden a little relief in the summer heat. Making life more enjoyable in the garden is what this is all about, as well as rediscovering a few of those little simple pleasures along the way. Now, I really get into old-fashioned approaches to things, but we'll also take a look at some new ideas, and we'll combine the best of both for a more successful garden. I think you're really going to enjoy our tour of summer, and it begins right here at Goldsmith Seeds in Gilroy, California, where they're on the cutting edge of seed production. For many of us, this is really what summer is all about. Lots of beautiful flowers. But have you ever wondered where they come from and where they get such funny names like impatience, cranberry punch? You know, cars, clothes, and all sorts of things have new models each year. And flowers, well, they're no different. With each new model comes a new name. I suppose it would be more fun for me to name a flower than just about anything else. This trial garden is where the new varieties that have been created are being tested and are on display. A petunia that's bluer than before, taller salvia, impatiens with more blooms. Well, here they all are. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. You see, none of these flowers will be offered to the general public unless they can stand up consistently to some pretty tough scrutiny. If these guys pass the test, you may see them in your local garden center in the next few years, or even in your own garden. All of these flowers are certainly beautiful, and as you can see, the choices are staggering. But for me, the real beauty comes from how you put them together. Everyone enjoys a splash of color by the front door on the patio, and there's no better way to achieve this than by creating a classic arrangement in a container. So let's get to work putting this one together. I've found that by starting with a large container like this, it's actually easier to take care of your plants, even though trying to maneuver something this size can be difficult. It's important in the beginning to site your container where your plants will be happiest and not too hot. You see, summer heat can zap all of the energy out of your plants. You know, even full sun-loving plants like salvia and verbena actually do well in half-day summer sun. As far as soil goes, I like using just a basic potting mix. It's light, easy to handle, and generally drains well, which is very important. When it comes to water, make it easy on yourself and put a saucer under the container. And another way to retain moisture is to use some of these little water-retentive polymers. This stuff actually looks like old-fashioned ice cream salt. As the crystals absorb water, they expand. Then they release the moisture to the plants as needed. For a container this size, it only takes about 3 tablespoons. Just sprinkle it in and blend it into the soil. These water-retentive polymers are relatively new to the garden scene, and they can actually help cut down on the number of times you have to water your containers. Now, enough of the practical. Let's get into some design ideas. Whenever I'm doing a garden or a container, I always like to start out with a plan. Start in the beginning with the end in mind. And in a container like this, I've always found it easy to look at plants in an abstract sort of way. I use something that cascades over the edge, I have something tall and spiky, and something full and round to fill out the container. Like this purple smoke tree that I chose strictly for its foliage. You see, plants don't have to have flowers to be interesting. For a tall, spiky look, I'm using this blue Victoria salvia. And to further carry out this vertical spiky effect, I like this asparagus fern for its long, graceful lines. Now, to cascade over the edge of the pot, I'm using this pale pink moss verbena. In any container I put together, I always go for plants that have interesting textures and try to combine them. When it comes to color, it's always easier for me to hover around a single color family. The pale pink adds sparkle to the arrangement, where the dark leaf of the smoke tree gives it its depth. Now, to continue the same level of depth in other containers I'm going to do, I'll use this red leaf canna and the purple fountain grass. Both can take full hot sun. One of the nice things about container gardening is that you rarely have to deal with weeds. Of course, it's a different story in the garden. Next, we'll take a look at dealing with one of summer's biggest problems. You're probably wondering what this little guy and all of his friends have to do with gardening. Well, as odd as it may sound, geese can be a big help in the garden by removing weeds. You see, just like me, they're driven by their appetites. Geese have been used for centuries as weeders, and now they're making a comeback. A goose likes nothing more than a young, tender weed to munch on. You see, they're quite happy to spend all day making a meal out of them. And of course, they spend a lot of time depositing the remains. So you have to be careful where you walk. Having a gaggle of geese in your backyard might be a difficult concept for you to explain to your neighbors. And I must admit, it's probably not the most efficient way for you to do your weeding. But it is encouraging that geese are being used as an organic approach to weed control on a larger basis in agriculture. Weeding for most of us is pretty mundane stuff, but I derive great pleasure this time of year pulling big rank weeds out of my garden and letting them sizzle on the hot concrete. I learned a long time ago that if you intend to pull your weeds, soaking the ground with water the day before makes the work much easier. Weeds can really be discouraging if they get out of control. They can clobber your plants, beating them out of nutrients, light, and water. Not to mention the unsightly way they can make your garden look. But there are ways of dealing with them other than this old-fashioned way. I've used some of these new approaches in my vegetable garden, and they've helped me produce plenty of good things to eat. I really enjoy growing lots of fresh vegetables. There's nothing like it. But you know, the area in my garden is not that big, and so it was important for me to come up with a way to maximize the space that I do have. And I did this by creating a grid of raised beds. In this particular area, I have 4 raised beds. This has proven to be manageable and very attractive. These beds were really easy to put together. I created the frames with 2x10 lumber, joining them at the corners with wood screws. Then I filled them with a soil mix that contained some sand and humus, the sand for good drainage, and the humus to help hold moisture and provide nutrient. You can make these beds any size you like, but when I designed these, I wanted to keep convenience in mind. I wanted to be able to reach into the center of the bed at any point around the square. Now, this isn't an original idea. It's been going on since the Renaissance in Europe. You see, in France, the width of a bed was determined by the length of the arms of the people who were responsible for weeding them. As for me, I'm always looking for any little technological advancement I can find to help give me an edge on my weed problem. That's why I like this filter fabric or weed barrier. You see, this literally smothers the weeds. It doesn't allow them to come up. I like this better than the black plastic because it's porous. It allows water and air to flow freely through these tiny little holes. Black plastic tends to suffocate the soil. Before I put down the weed barrier, I like to use these soaker hoses and spread them in the beds. It's another little modern convenience I found to be really handy during the hot summer. You see, I can get good distribution of moisture in the beds, and it keeps excess moisture off the foliage of the plants. It's a good way to conserve water. Uncoiling these hoses can be a little tricky sometimes, but you see, the objective here is to distribute them as evenly as possible throughout the bed. As far as the fabric, just make sure to overlap the edges so there can be no chance for weeds to emerge between areas that are uncovered. I've found using a few bricks to keep things in place very helpful. Now, you may be wondering, how do you get the plants planted through this? Well, it's simple. You just take a pair of scissors. For plants, I like to cut a small X. One about this size is really all I need for a small tomato plant. And for seeds, you just cut a long slit. You see, the key here is to keep the cuts as small as possible because weeds are opportunists and they'll find any way they can to grow. As a last measure, I tuck in all of the plants and cover the entire area with some of this wheat straw. Any form of mulch will work, but I prefer using this wheat straw because it's readily available and very clean. What mulches do for the garden is help keep weeds down, and in this case, helps hold that filter fabric or weed barrier in place. Now, once again, we've looked at the old and the new. We have the time-honored method of mulching, which has been done for centuries, and we have the new with the filter fabric. Now, enough about weeds and work. The summer's a time to kick back, relax, slow down a little bit to smell the roses. Next, we'll take a look at 12,000 blooming rose bushes and how to make the best part of this most favored flower last for a long, long time. Just look at all of these rose petals. There are millions of them, collected this morning from over 12,000 hybrid tea rose bushes. It takes approximately 30 large mature blooms to make 1 pound of petals. And over the course of the growing season, they'll harvest tons from the hillsides around here. The folks here at Galante Garden Roses don't let anything go to waste. You see, once a bloom is too mature to ship out as a cut flower like these, the petals are used. If you're like me, you want roses this beautiful to last forever, and so do the people here at Galante. They ship roses cut like this and petals all over the country. So to have the best of both worlds, we can enjoy cut flowers in season and the petals long afterwards. Let's take a look at a popular way to do this. Susanna Gamble at Gamble's Flower Farm is a pro at the art of making the most of roses. Susanna, you make such beautiful potpourri. How did you get started doing this?
Well, Alan, it's just a byproduct of a flower farm. We have all these roses, and it's just natural to dry them because they're so pretty.
Well, it seems like you have more roses than you ever have before.
We have about 1,700 roses now, and we've branched into selling roses in cans and bare roots, so we have a lot more roses to offer people.
Right, so you're just not selling the cut flowers anymore.
We still do cut flowers, and Carl's in charge of production. His day is packed. He has to get up very early and spray and water and do all that, and then plant ongoingly. And then my job is to sell and manage this little shop here.
Since you're in charge of making the potpourri here, how do you keep up with it all?
Well, it's simple. When I go out to gather flowers, I just take a big basket and strip the petals off, put them in there, and then we have this old truck that's died on us, and it sits out there in the field. So I sprinkle the petals lightly, not too thickly, in these trays. We have a lot of those left over.
Right. Okay, so this is just a black plastic nursery tray.
Yes.
I see.
And then I cover it with another one, make a clamshell, stick it on top of the truck, and the sun does the work for me.
How long does it take to go from fresh petals like this to those completely dried for your potpourri?
Oh, just hours, maybe a day at the
Really?
most. And but the secret is to lay them in lightly, and then go and turn it over. We flip it over so that they get more surfaces exposed.
Once the petals dry, how long can you expect the aroma to last?
It depends. It depends a lot on how fragrant the bloom is to begin with. Your old-fashioned roses will last a long time. In fact, I have a jar. When I was a kid in the 40s, my grandmother had this jar with rose petals in it.
Wow.
And it still smells like roses.
That's amazing. Those are the original petals.
Those are the original ones. I inherited this from my aunt, and I remember it when I was a kid.
Isn't that great?
But with the ones that I have, I usually like put them in the bathroom, few petals, and just let them smell like rose petals. Sometimes I add aromatic oils like lavender or sandalwood. That's my favorite. Some people like to put cinnamon sticks, orange peels, just to have their own version of potpourri.
So it's just a matter of being creative and coming up with your own combination.
That's right.
You know, I think Susanna does a marvelous job preserving the color in her potpourri. But you know, you don't have to grow as many flowers as she and Carl do at the flower farm. It's amazing how many petals a single rose bush can produce. Now that we've stimulated our sense of smell, how about giving our taste buds a jolt? When I return, we'll take a look at one of the most favorite flavors of summer. There's nothing like the flavor of fresh produce, and there's nothing like watermelons for me to conjure up memories of summer. If you're like me, you probably don't have much room in your vegetable garden to grow these babies, but that shouldn't get in the way of you enjoying them. It's an old-fashioned flavor that, in my opinion, can't be beat or improved upon, unless, of course, it would be with an exceptional watermelon recipe that can give homemade ice cream a run for its money. I have to leave it up to the growers to produce my watermelons. You see, the vines can grow easily up to 20 feet, so as you can see, it takes quite a bit of room to grow them. I always enjoyed it when my granddad grew them every year. They all had amazing names, like Georgia rattlesnake for those long ones with stripes. He would bring them out of the field, and my little cousins and I would sit on the tailgate of the truck and eat as many of them as we could until we thought we would burst, always spitting the seed as far as we could. My granddad Smith always said that if we swallowed the seeds, the vines would grow out of our ears. We all had a lot of fun in those days, but I guess modern technology does have its benefits. Now they've come up with these seedless varieties of watermelons. See, it's all bright red heart and almost no seeds. There are a lot of stories surrounding the watermelon, but one of my favorites is when Adam and Eve were banished from the Garden of Eden, they managed to slip out a little piece of paradise, and that was the watermelon. And now I guess we're all the better for it. You know, Mark Twain considered this fruit to be the food of the angels, and I'd have to agree with him. There's nothing like a piece of ice-cold watermelon on a hot summer day. Several years ago, I ran across a recipe for watermelon sorbet, and it's rapidly become one of my favorite desserts. Sorbets are light, tasty, and no fat. Great way to top off a meal. And it all starts with the perfect melon. Now, anyone who's ever tried to choose one of these knows that it can be quite a challenge trying to determine whether or not it's right. But there are several tests you can apply. The first is sound. You want to choose the melon that sounds the most hollow. Well, this one sounds like the winner to me. Now, there are other ways you can tell as well. For instance, you want to make sure that the bottom of the melon is light, almost white or pale yellow. And some claim that you can check its belly button. If it's pale or light around it, that's a good sign that it's right. But I think the best way is just to cut into the melon. To make the sorbet, you'll need 6 cups of watermelon juice. And it's as simple as scooping out the flesh of the melon, seeds and all, and putting it in the blender. You see, the seeds really don't matter here, because once it's blended, I'll just strain the juice. Depending on the size of your blender, you may have to fill it a couple of times to get enough juice. I think this is a great way to use these seeded melons. I like saving the seedless for eating sliced. To the juice, I just add a couple of cups of sugar and about 1/3 of a cup of lemon juice and mix it all together. Now I pour the liquid into my ice cream maker and freeze it just as I do ice cream. This only takes a few minutes to freeze. When you make it, you'll find it amazing how just 3 simple ingredients come together for an outstanding summer treat. Coming up, I'll have a few quick tips on how to satisfy those thirsty plants and lawns. During the early summer, I've always found it helpful to deep soak my lawns in flower beds. This encourages deeper root growth and makes them better able to withstand periods of drought. Also, watering in the early morning will give plants and grass a chance to dry before nightfall, and this can help cut down on problems with disease. If you're like me and have a tough time remembering to water, try attaching an inexpensive water timer to your hose and sprinkler if you don't have an automated system. This can be an easy solution. We've covered a lot of territory and seen how many of the old ways are still the best in the garden. Now, don't let this summer slip by without enjoying some of its simpler pleasures. You know, even though the world seems as though it's gotten out of hand, there can still be a slower, more relaxed pace. From the garden, I'm Alan Smith.
In this garden I dream of a bed of flowers. Bluebirds sing of the beauty all around us. And every time the sun comes out, I can't help but smile. Oh, no, I can't help but smile.